The dog wouldn't let anyone near her. That was the first thing the paramedics noticed when they pulled up to the gravel shoulder on Highway 16, 40 minutes outside of Prince George. A black and tan shepherd mix, maybe 80 pounds, crouched over the woman lying face down in the ditch like she was the last thing worth protecting in the world. One of the paramedics, a big guy from Vanderhoof who'd been on the job for 11 years, later said it was the quietest aggressive dog he'd ever encountered. No barking, no lunging, just that low, steady vibration coming up from the animal's chest and two amber eyes that said, "Try it and find out." They didn't try it. They called animal control instead, and while they waited, they talked to her through the dog. She was conscious, barely. Her name was Sergeant Vivienne Hartley, though she didn't give them that right away. What she gave them first was a curt instruction not to touch the dog, delivered in the flat, unhurried tone of someone who had said far more alarming things in far worse situations and meant every word. The animal control officer who finally arrived was a woman named Deb, and Deb had handled military working dogs before. She knew enough not to make sudden movements. She crouched at a distance, spoke quietly, kept her eyes low. The shepherd, his vest still read K9 unit in faded yellow letters, though it was old enough that the Velcro had started to give, watched her for a long moment. Then he stepped back exactly 6 inches. That was all Deb got. 6 inches, and it was enough. They loaded Vivienne Hartley onto the stretcher while the dog stood at the edge of the road and watched. And when they closed the ambulance doors, he started running. He ran the full 40 minutes to University Hospital of Northern British Columbia. He was sitting at the emergency bay doors when the ambulance arrived. Vivienne had not planned to collapse on a highway in October. She had planned, loosely, to drive to her cabin on Francois Lake, spend a week not talking to anyone, and then figure out what came next. That was the extent of it. After 18 years with the Canadian Armed Forces, the last 6 as a dog handler with the military police, planning had started to feel like something she did for other people. Something she filled out in triplicate and handed to someone above her in the chain. For herself, she'd stopped bothering. The dog's name was Bandit. He had been her partner for 4 years, and before that he'd belonged to a corporal named Stephen Okafor, who had died in a vehicle accident outside of Kandahar in 2019. Bandit had been in the vehicle. He'd walked away from it, which was maybe why he moved the way he did, with this particular kind of deliberateness, like he was aware that surviving something was not the same as being undamaged by it. Vivienne understood that. It was part of why they'd gotten along so well from the start. She'd taken early release 8 months ago. Medical, though she hadn't told her family that part. As far as her mother in Kamloops knew, Vivienne had simply decided it was time to come home, and Vivienne had allowed her to believe that because the alternative, explaining the headaches, the tinnitus, the 3 months of physio for her left shoulder, the appointment with the psychologist that she'd cancelled twice and finally attended with the specific intention of saying as little as possible, was a conversation she didn't have the energy for. The cabin had been her plan, some silence, some wood to chop, Bandit running the tree line at dusk. She'd made it about 200 kilometers before the headache behind her left eye got bad enough that she'd pulled over, and then the next clear thing she remembered was the gravel against her cheek and the sound of Bandit's breathing close to her ear. The ER at UHNBC was busy for a Thursday afternoon. A nurse named Teresa checked Vivienne's vitals with the brisk efficiency of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything and wrote her notes without comment when Vivienne said she didn't want anyone called. Not yet. She'd make the calls herself when she knew what she was dealing with. "The dog," Vivienne said. "He's outside," Teresa said. "He can't be outside. It's 4 degrees. There's not a lot I can do about that. This is a hospital." "I know it's a hospital," Vivienne said, with more patience than she felt. "I'm just telling you he'll find a way in." Theresa looked at her over the top of her clipboard with the particular expression of someone who has learned to distinguish between patients who are confused and patients who simply know things she doesn't. She made a note. Bandit found a way in at approximately 9:47 p.m. through a side entrance that someone had propped open with a janitor's cart. He made it through 2 hallways and a set of double doors before anyone stopped him, which was actually better than Vivienne had expected. She heard the commotion from her bed, the raised voices, the sound of someone saying, "Whose dog is this?" and she called out from behind the curtain. And for a moment everything went very quiet. Then a low, familiar shape pushed through the gap in the curtain and laid his chin on the edge of her mattress. "Good boy," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. She heard the curtain shift and looked up. A doctor, young, maybe 30, with the kind of exhausted precision in her eyes that medical residents get around hour 20 of a shift, was standing in the gap looking at the dog, not with the annoyance Vivienne expected. "He ran here from the highway," the doctor said. "It wasn't quite a question. He's done longer distances." Vivienne said, "I'm Dr. Fiona Bellemare." "I'm Dr. Fiona Bellemare. You have a concussion, a blood pressure reading that concerns me, and a dog that apparently outran an ambulance. I'd like to keep you overnight." "I'd like to decline," Vivienne said. "I'd like you to reconsider." Dr. Bellemare said in a tone that suggested she was not unaccustomed to people declining things that were obviously good for them. "The concussion alone warrants monitoring. But I also think you know there's something else going on, and I think you've been not dealing with it for a while." Vivienne said nothing. Bandit shifted his weight and pressed closer against the mattress. "I'll see what I can do about the dog," Dr. Bellemare said, and left. She stayed 3 days. That surprised her. She'd gone in intending to stay 1 night, then leave before anyone could generate enough paperwork to make her feel trapped. But the neurologist who reviewed her scans, a quiet, methodical man named Dr. Percival Marsh, who spoke slowly and looked directly at her when he talked, which she appreciated, had found something worth watching. "Not dangerous," he said, "but worth watching. There had been a blast injury 18 months ago from an IED that had gone off closer than it should have. She'd been treated and cleared and returned to duty, and she'd told herself and everyone who asked that she was fine. She had mostly believed it. Dr. Marsh didn't call her a liar. He just laid the scans out and pointed to what he saw, and then he waited while she looked at them, and she respected him enough for that quiet patience that she didn't argue. Bandit was permitted to stay, eventually, after Dr. Bellemare had what Vivienne imagined was a fairly spirited conversation with hospital administration. He was given a corner of the room, technically in violation of 3 different policies, and he stayed in that corner with the focused compliance of a dog who understood that this was the compromise available and was taking it. The nurses on the ward learned quickly, without announcing themselves first. Susan, not because she was hostile, she wasn't, particularly, but because Bandit had opinions about movement he hadn't been informed of in advance, and his opinions were expressed quietly but emphatically, in that low chest vibration way that made people stop walking without fully understanding why. One nurse tried anyway, a cheerful young man named Trevor, who moved fast and smiled big and reached for Vivienne's chart before Bandit's head had lifted 2 inches off his paws. Trevor took a step back, laughed nervously, and said, "Friendly guy, huh? He's not trying to be unfriendly," Vivienne said. "He just hasn't decided about you yet. How do I help him decide?" "Give him time," she said. "He'll figure it out." Trevor, to his credit, took that at face value. He started stopping just inside the doorway when he came in, going still for a moment, giving Bandit the chance to register him before he moved any further. By the 2nd day, Bandit had stopped lifting his head when Trevor entered. By the 3rd, he allowed Trevor to reach across the bed without comment. Vivienne watched this without saying anything, but she filed it away. The physiotherapist came on the 2nd afternoon. Her name was Constance Obi, and she had the particular kind of calm that Vivienne associated with people who had learned not to take other people's resistance personally, not because they didn't care, but because they understood that resistance was usually just fear in a different coat. Constance sat in the chair by the window, not at the bedside, and talked to Vivienne about range of motion and headache triggers and sleep patterns, and then she said, in the same unhurried way she said everything else, "You've been compensating for the shoulder for a while. Long enough that some of the movement patterns are fairly entrenched. It's going to take work to retrain them." "I know," Vivienne said. "Do you want to do that work?" The question was simple enough that Vivienne almost didn't catch it. She looked at Constance. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the body part is manageable," Constance said. "But sometimes people come in with a physical injury, and the thing underneath it, the thing the body's been protecting, is something different, and the physical work only goes so far if the other thing isn't being addressed too." Vivienne looked at the window. The sky outside was the particular grey of northern BC in October, heavy and low, like it was thinking about something. "There's a psychologist on staff here," Constance said. "Dr. Anand Kural. He works with a lot of veterans. I'm not pushing. Just mention." "You're a little pushing," Vivienne said. Constance smiled. "A little," she agreed. She didn't call Dr. Kural, but she didn't not think about it either. What she thought about, in the long stretches of the second night when the ward went quiet and Bandit breathed steadily in his corner, was Corporal Okafor. She thought about the way he'd talked about Bandit in the briefings she'd attended after his death, when they were trying to figure out what to do with the dog. "He's not broken," Okafor's team leader had said. "He's just particular about who he trusts now. You have to earn it fresh." She'd gone to meet Bandit expecting a difficult dog and found instead an animal who was simply precise about what he would give and to whom and when. She'd understood it instantly. She'd thought at the time that she understood it because she was good at her job. She understood now that she'd understood it because she recognized it. On the morning of the third day, Dr. Bellemare came in for rounds and found Vivienne sitting up, dressed, Bandit at her feet, clearly ready to leave. "I'll discharge you this afternoon," Dr. Bellemare said, without preamble. "But I want to see you back here in 2 weeks for a follow-up with Dr. Marsh, and I want you to have someone with you at the lake." "I'll be fine," Vivienne said. "You were face down in a ditch on Highway 16 4 days ago," Dr. Bellemare said, pleasantly. "I'm not worried about fine. I'm worried about what happens if fine turns into not fine when you're 40 minutes from the nearest person." Vivienne didn't answer. Dr. Bellemare sat down in Constance's chair. She didn't say anything for a moment. Vivienne had noticed this about her. She used silence the way some people used pressure, not to force something, but to make room for it. "I read your file," Dr. Bellemare said finally. "Not the personal parts, the medical history, the blast injury, the shoulder, the timeline." "Okay," Vivienne said. "You came back from that deployment, and you went straight back to work. You did your physio at 7 in the morning before your shift. You didn't take any time." "There wasn't time to take," Vivienne said. She stopped. "There were things that needed doing," Dr. Bellemare said, not unkindly. "There always are." Bandit shifted, moved closer to Vivienne's feet. She felt the weight of him settle against her boot. "My father was military," Dr. Bellemare said. "Royal Canadian Regiment. He did 2 tours and came home and never talked about either of them. And by the time he figured out that not talking wasn't the same as healed, most of the time was already gone." She paused. "I'm not saying that's your situation. I don't know your situation. I'm just saying I've seen what it looks like from the outside when someone decides that getting through something is the same as getting past it." Vivienne looked at her. Dr. Bellemare looked back, direct and unhurried, and didn't flinch from it. "What did you want to be?" Vivienne said finally. It wasn't what she'd meant to say. It came out anyway. Dr. Bellemare blinked. "What? Before medicine? When you were a kid? What did you want to be?" A pause. Then, unexpectedly, a small smile. A marine biologist, Dr. Bellemare said. I wanted to study orcas. I grew up in Campbell River. What changed? My father had a cardiac event when I was 16. In our kitchen, I was the only one home. She said it simply, without drama. After that, I wanted to understand what had happened inside him, physiologically. And then I just kept wanting to understand things. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. Bandit's weight was warm and steady against her foot. The corporal whose dog this was, she said. Okafor, he died fast. It wasn't the kind of thing where there was time to do anything. The vehicle rolled and the blast hit and it was over. She stopped. Started again. I've told myself for 4 years that there was nothing I could have done because I wasn't there. I was 2 kilometers away running a separate sweep. I've told myself that enough times that most of the time I believe it. And the rest of the time? Dr. Bellemare said. The rest of the time I think about the morning briefing where I could have flagged a root concern and I didn't, because the timeline was tight and I didn't want to hold things up. She looked at her hands. I didn't know. I want to be clear about that. I didn't know. But I also didn't ask the question, and I've thought about that a lot. The ward was quiet. Somewhere down the hall a cart rattled past. Bandit breathed. You've been carrying that for 4 years, Dr. Bellemare said. I've been carrying it exactly as long as I've had his dog, Vivienne said. She was discharged at 2 o'clock. She sat in her truck in the hospital parking lot for a while, not going anywhere. She could hear him breathing in that slow, even way he had when he was calm and watching. She thought about the cabin on Francois Lake, the quiet, the trees. She thought about what Dr. Bellemare had said. Getting through something is not the same as getting past it. She thought about Okafor and the morning briefing and the route she hadn't questioned and the 4 years she'd spent being good at her job and not thinking about it any more than she had to. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to a contact she hadn't called in 7 months. His name was Dr. Anand Kural, and Constance had mentioned him, and Vivienne had put the number in her phone that same afternoon without entirely meaning to. She looked at the number for a long time. Bandit shifted in the back seat and put his chin on her headrest. Very close to her left ear, she pressed call. It rang twice before someone picked up. A calm, even voice said, Dr. Kural's office. My name is Vivienne Hartley, she said. Sergeant. Retired. I was told. Someone suggested I might call. She stopped. Tried again. I think I have some things I need to talk through. There was a brief pause, the ordinary pause of someone checking a calendar, and then the voice said, Of course. Can you come in Thursday? She exhaled. Yes, she said. I can come in Thursday. She sat in the truck a moment longer after she hung up. The sky had cleared a little, the way it sometimes does in the north in the late afternoon, the light going thin and gold through the spruce trees at the edge of the lot. It wasn't warm, but it was the kind of cold that felt honest. Bandit breathed against her ear, slow and steady, and she reached back without looking and put her hand on the top of his head, and he stayed completely still under her palm, the way he always did when he understood that this was what she needed. Not a word, not a movement, just the solid, unhurried fact of being there. She put the truck in drive. The road back to Francois Lake was 3 hours, and she had time, and she took it slow.